Hold it. How do you fight fire?
With a hose?
No, with fire. You fight fire with fire.
Oh, I'm telling you right.
There's the sheriff. We'll ask him. Don't you fight fire with fire?
What?
How do you fight fire?
With a hose.
I told you, Barney.
How do you fight a fire? How about fighting a fire in a relationship? Have you ever had one of those days when it seems like everyone in the world was bugging you? Maybe you don't even know how to explain it. Do you know anyone who bugs you or someone you literally cannot stand? What is it about some people that makes it where we can't stand to be around them or talk to them or give them credit for something or be nice to them? Maybe it's because they're selfish or dishonest. Maybe they're a know-it-all or they're big-headed or a braggart. Or maybe they're a one-upper. Or maybe they're just mean. Normally, you can talk to someone at school or church, but in some cases, the people at school and church are around you so much that they bother you more than anybody else. How about this? Someone wanting to give you good advice will say something like, "You don't have to like the person, just love them." And they walk away, leaving you to wonder how in the world you're going to do that. Well, we're going to tackle that very question in this class. In deciding any strategy that you expect to be successful, what's the very first thing you should do? First, identify the problem, which, when combating something, means identifying the enemy because the enemy is your problem. For this study, we'll start by looking at Ephesians chapter 6. Start reading in verse 12. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Stop right there. After discussing people we can't stand, one might think that our struggle is against flesh and blood. Well, what is flesh and blood? It's people. Pay attention. The Bible tells us that people are not our problem. If you're going to make it in life and be pleasing to God, you had better identify your enemy. Now continue reading. But against rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, there you have it. The problem is not with people, it is with evil. Still not sure? Think about this. God loves people. God hates evil. God loves all people. Yes, even the people you can't stand. And we are called to do the same. The Great Commission in Mark 16:15, for example, says, "Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation." Jesus didn't say, "Preach the gospel to the people I created that you like," or "Preach the gospel to every person you can stand to be around." Although it may seem like someone in your life is a big problem, remember this. According to Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, people, which are flesh and blood, are not your problem. Evil is your problem. John 3:16 tells us that God loves the entire world. Don't make the same mistake the Israelites made. They thought that God loved only them. Now, it's easy to see why people may feel that way, seeing how there's really bad evil everywhere in this world. And don't we tend to picture evil as something like murder and robbery and stealing and things like that? And we may think, how can God love those people? You'll find, though, that the definition of evil is not as easy as you may think. Sometimes, evil is even hard to notice because it's all around us and it's so subtle that after a while we don't even see it anymore. And it's found many times where someone who you know continues to sin against you or sins against someone you know in little ways. In this series of lessons, we're going to be focusing on that type of evil. Now, whether they realize it or not, the person who sins against you can be used by the evil one as a weapon in a spiritual battle. But you have to remember, people are a weapon. They are not the evil. Look at this slide. People equals weapon. People do not equal evil. And know that Satan can use a bad relationship to tempt you to sin. Also be aware that although we usually assume that evil happens through unbelievers, evil can also be done by believers. Even in the church, a brother in the Lord can sin against another brother, and we have to understand that the rulers, the authorities, and the cosmic powers we read of in Ephesians chapter 6 work in many subtle ways and in many places. Remember this, though. The battle, according to Paul in Ephesians 6, is a spiritual battle between good and evil. Let me ask you this. Can you see radio waves or ultraviolet light? How about sound? The fact is, you can't hear many things that a dog can hear no matter how hard you try. Does that mean there's no sound? Because we can't see ultraviolet light or radio waves, does that mean they're not there? My point is this. There's a whole spiritual realm that you cannot see, which is having a huge effect on your relationship. You're waging war against evil, not people, everywhere you go. And Satan's going to try to use people as a weapon to defeat you. You may now be wondering, well, where's God in this battle? He's in His Word. And hopefully another place you'll find Him is in your heart. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 10, through the church, the manifold or multifaceted wisdom of God might be known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. You see, God makes His wisdom known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places through the people in the church. So, how do we show God's wisdom? By trusting God and following His Word. But remember, just because you're on the right side of this battle, know that if you have decided to follow in the steps of Jesus, you're going to be attacked by evil. Remember what Jesus said in John 15:20. He said, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they'll also persecute you. The goal will be to defeat you, but the evil done to you can be overcome. In fact, did you know that you're commanded to win the conflict? Romans 12:21, which, by the way, is the theme verse for our lessons, tells us, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In other words, God tells us, you don't fight fire with fire, but you fight fire with a hose. In Romans 12:21, we find the key to dealing with evil in our relationships. When I look back over the years, I can tell you that the majority of people's perceived problems stem from their inability to get along with somebody else. Many times, because one or more in a relationship are angry. It may have been a spouse, a parent, a child, a friend, a workmate, co-worker, boss, church member, whoever. I'll ask you this. Have you ever thought about where anger comes from? Why do people get angry? Usually, it starts when someone is wronged or there's a perceived wrong. When someone is done wrongly, there's a perception of unfairness. When people feel they've been treated unfairly, it usually leads to anger. The conflict starts eating at them, then they start getting emotionally upset, and from their point of view, they feel like they have the right to be angry because they've been wronged. If this is the case, Romans 12:21 is God's prescription. He says, overcome evil with good. This, of course, may be quite different from what you want to do. You may not even want to do it once you've grasped the concept of Romans 12:21. But regardless of how you feel, it's still what God says. And believe me, it's the most practical advice you'll ever hear. In this series of lessons, we're going to look at 7 steps based on Romans chapter 12 in verses 14 to 21 that teach you how to overcome a bad relationship. Now, because this teaching is so different from the way we tend to think, we're going to study each of these verses in depth. But to understand these verses, it's necessary to start with the theme verse, which is actually located at the end, and then go back to the beginning. And that is, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. Is there any doubt about the possibility of winning over evil? Paul wants to clear it up in Romans 12:21. God doesn't want us to merely hold our own when someone harms us. And God certainly doesn't want us to multiply evil to defeat evil. No, He wants us to overcome, to be victorious, and we can only defeat evil with good. And that takes maturity. As you'll see in Romans 5, Christian maturity doesn't happen automatically or overnight. The struggles we face in life, believe it or not, can actually be beneficial for us. They can help develop our faith, which is a process that begins with suffering. Notice how Paul describes a progression from suffering to hope. He says, "We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that sufferings produce endurance. And endurance produces character, and character produces hope." That's Romans 5:3 and 4. Through suffering, we learn endurance. And having learned to endure, we build character. And our strength in character increases our hope. It's a gradual learning process that goes on for our entire lives. Are you aware that God can solve your relationship problems? You might be thinking, but how? Well, He's not only given you the strength to win over your strife, as we know in Psalms 18:2, He will also not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able to bear, as we learn in 1 Corinthians 10:13. And He's also given you a strategy that's found in Romans 12, verses 14 to 21, which, as I said, will be the basis for our study for the next few weeks. Too many Christians believe in the power of God, but still don't know what to do about their problems. That's why God gives us His text. So if you feel defeated, don't give up. If someone has treated you poorly, God has a strategy, and it will work. Now, if you know anything about golf, the real test in golf and in life is not keeping out of the rough, but it's about getting out after we're in. And another old saying that applies here, smooth seas never made a skillful sailor. Think about it. Would you rather sail across the ocean with a captain who's experienced all sorts of bad weather and high seas, or would you put your trust in a captain who's never sailed in bad weather? You know, far too often we try to live our lives where we never have to face any rough times. Well, that would be nice, but that's not the way life happens. And we should enjoy the fairways and we should enjoy the smooth seas. But the real test is going to come when we get into rough situations. Look, people are going to do bad things to you. It's unavoidable. What then is going to be your response? Remember, to overcome means to win. And Paul tells us how to win. He says, overcome evil with good. Paul's not saying that we have to sit back and be passive in this world. He's teaching us about aggressive discipleship. Think about what Jesus did. His enemies didn't take His life. We're told that Jesus laid down His life. This is how we know what love is. He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers, 1 John 3:16. Laying down your life, as Jesus did, is an aggressive action. Okay, so far in our strategy, we've identified the enemy, and now we have to choose our weapons. In every fight, you must choose your weapons, and we have to choose wisely. Paul also reminds us of this in 2 Corinthians. He writes, "The weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds." 2 Corinthians 10:4. Divine power. That means power from God. The weapons of the world are from the evil one. Our weapons are mighty and from God. If we're going to defeat evil, we have to choose our weapons carefully. We must use godly weapons, not worldly weapons. We have to aggressively attack this worldly evil with godly good. When people have wronged us, We can only overcome their evil with our good. And you may still be thinking that the old eye for an eye thing sounds pretty good, but listen, when something wrong has been done to you, you can't use evil for two reasons. First of all, evil's not as powerful as good. Remember the Indiana Jones movie clip? What did he do? He demonstrated that you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. He had an unfair advantage, and he used it. You have a similar advantage over evil when you use good as your weapon. Now, warning, you will always be tempted to return evil for evil, big time. One of the reasons I think we do this is because we want immediate justice, and we're sometimes short-sighted, and I'll be discussing that in a later lesson. We need to remember what John said referring to Jesus. He who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. 1 John 4:4. I'll tell you this. If you think evil is more powerful than our God, then your picture of God is way too small. And the second reason we don't return evil for evil is because our objective is to destroy evil, not create it. Duh. Doing evil puts you on the wrong side of God. Satan's followers are good at doing evil. Do you really want to play on his battlefield against his experts with his weapons? I don't think so. If we use evil against evil, we're playing Satan's game by Satan's rules. So what is our response to the evil in this world? We are to do something good. As disciples of Jesus, we're to be spokesmen against the evil in this world. But that's not enough. We must do good in any evil situation. Now notice, I didn't say be good, I said do good. It doesn't matter how bad the situation is, we must respond to it aggressively with good. And to do good in any situation, you have to ask yourself the right question. I want you to remember the parable of the Good Samaritan. When the Levite and the priest passed by the needy man on the side of the road, they no doubt asked themselves, what's going to happen to me if I help this person? Now, that wasn't an aggressive evil, it was merely a passive evil, or better still, it was lack of an aggressive good. They didn't get involved because it demanded something of them. Their focus was on themselves. Anyone who has done good for someone knows this. To do good may require a loss of time or money or position or pride. Religious or racial hassles can also occur if the person is not like us. We see a lot of this kind of evil, don't we? What will happen to me if I help this person? This question is at the very root of why we don't want to do good to the person, especially the person who wronged us. When someone wrongs us, we focus on ourselves. Now, the Samaritan is called good because he finally asks the right question. What will happen to him if I don't help? His focus was on others. Then he helps the very kind of person he most likely can't stand. Jesus said about the Samaritan, go and do likewise. That means you see the needs of others and do something about them. Ask yourself this. What's going to happen to this world if we don't do good? Think about that. This world is lost. Look, we are wronged by the unfairness of this world every single day. But what's going to happen to people if we don't help? And what's going to happen to the church, which is us, if we don't do good? There are churches today that are troubled with divisions that were started because someone wronged someone else. I've seen it. We have to do good and serve our brothers and sisters, even the ones that we can't stand because they may have wronged us. Didn't Jesus wash Judas's feet? How can we overcome the evil in this world with good if we haven't learned from Jesus' example? We have to keep in mind that Jesus gave us an example of how to live, and Jesus is the supreme example of doing good. When looking at a world full of people who have wronged God, Jesus asked, "What will happen to them if I don't help?" The answer was that the world would be lost, and so he fought evil with good, an aggressive good. He willingly went to the cross. The cross represented the ultimate evil, and Jesus represented the ultimate good. So we praise Jesus today because good overcame evil. And because Jesus was victorious, there's also victory for us. That is lesson 1 in our series. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Next week, talk isn't cheap. Until then, look around you. Find where you can do good. Help someone else. And, as Sally says, be sweet.